Now, the question is, how did Jesus map that out? How did he achieve his goal? Well, immediately when I think of this, I think of two scenes. There are two scenes that tend to bookend Jesus' time pouring into his small group, his disciples. On the one hand, you have Mark chapter 1, verse 17. And then on the other hand, you have John chapter 17, verse 4. Here's the beginning and here's the end. Arguably, Mark chapter 1 is where Jesus begins to pour into his disciples, except they kind of already knew him. So this is where Mark chapter 1, verse 17 is where Jesus is walking along the beach, and he sees Simon and Andrew, and I think it's later James and John. And he says, "Come follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." They already knew him by then. He was already traveling around. He had performed some miracles. I think Andrew was the one that had been at the baptism, so Andrew had witnessed all of these things. In other words, Jesus had already established a sense of credibility in himself, so that when he said, "Follow me," they immediately dropped everything and they just went after him. Okay? "Follow me and I will make you become fishers of men." Now we go over all the way to John chapter 17. This is the priestly prayer. This is the night that Jesus is to be arrested. And he's praying to the Father. And he says, "I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do." Now, an inductive Bible study question is, what was the work? What does Jesus mean by work in that context? If you literally go down verse 5 all the way down, a little bit further, you see that Jesus is talking about his time that he poured into his disciples, his small group. So we have Jesus beginning it, and then we have Jesus saying, "I'm done." And then the question is, how did he get there? Well, if we just have these two pieces out here already, I think we can pull out three big ideas. And so I'm just going to give them to you now, and we're just going to focus on those three big ideas for the rest of the time. So here they are. Before you head to your destination, number one, you need to start at the end. Number two, you have to know which roads to take. Only the right roads, and no other. And number three, you got to know when you're there. You got to know when you've arrived. Jesus started at the end. If you notice, his pitch to the disciples was, "Follow me and I will make you become fishers of men." We know that his destination was that they were to become disciple makers. He literally is saying, "Follow me to my destination." He begins with the disciples at the end. And by the way, Jesus tended to do this a lot. He kept giving them glimpses of their destination. He foreshadowed it over and over again. "You will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Truly I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria." So it goes back to something I mentioned a moment ago. It's not that he just in the very beginning said, "Well, I told you once and I don't need to say it again." He keeps repeating it over and over again so that they can understand that where they're going. This is where I'm going, and this is where you should be going with me. Now the question is, why did Jesus do that? Why begin or start at the end? And here's why. Understanding always precedes commitment. Let me say that again. Understanding always precedes commitment. Now let me say that same thing upside down. If there is no understanding, there can be no true commitment. So I'm reminded of a really famous story. I'm sure some of you have heard this story, but a man is walking. He comes across three masons. Three masons, not Freemasons. That's another class. A man came across three masons who were working at chipping away these chunks of granite from large blocks. And the first mason seemed pretty unhappy at his job. He's just chipping away, and then he keeps looking at his watch. And when the man asked him what it was that he was doing, the first mason responded rather curtly, "I'm hammering this stupid rock. I can't wait until 5 o'clock, though, when it's all done." The second mason was hammering away a little more diligently, though, and when asked what it was that he was doing, he said, "I'm building a wall. It's not bad, but I just can't wait for this to be done." Third mason is hammering at his block, but he's doing it fervently. He's taking his time and he's stepping back and he's looking at and admiring at his work. And then he comes back and chips off a few more small pieces until he was satisfied that it was the best job that he could do. And when questioned as to what he was doing, he stopped and he looked at the sky and he said, "I'm building a cathedral." Understanding always precedes commitment. That's the first reason that Jesus started at the end. The second reason is, now we're tapping into step number 2 of the proper order of persuasion. When you give somebody the destination that you are going to, and you are passionate about it, you are excited. You don't sound like Ferris Bueller's teacher in the beginning of Ferris Bueller. You get other people to connect with your passion. That's step number 2 of the proper order of persuasion. You build an emotional connection with them. And so he's giving them an understanding of where they're going, and he's building their excitement and passion and getting them persuaded to join him. Now, I do this in the classroom. So I teach English literature honors at the school that I'm at, and every year I get the same kind of students. They come in, not all of them, but a lot of them come in with an attitude. They got their eyes rolled up in the back of their head, sigh. They go find a seat in the way back, far away from me, sit down, put their feet up on the desk, and then I get angry. And they always say the same thing. "Why I gotta be here? Why am I here?" Okay? And it makes my colleagues very upset. So when I meet with my colleagues, and they're always like, "This is the most important class that they will ever take in their lives, Shakespeare." But I actually think that the students, somewhere in there, they have kind of a legitimate question. Because if you think about it, students go all the way through elementary school and then part of junior high or wherever, however that works out, and they study grammar. And you need the conventions of grammar in order to communicate well for a bunch of things so that you can operate in society. But at some point, they graduate from grammar. And at that point, a student says, "I'm done. I don't need English anymore. I know the language." And then they start, in high school, they start studying literature. And in the hands of a wrong teacher, they have no idea why they're studying literature. So I think it's kind of a legitimate question. So what I do is I don't begin, in the first week of teaching, I don't begin with any assignments. I don't begin by giving them any quizzes. What I do is I explain to them why they're here, and I tell them our destination together for this class. So usually what I do this year, I started off with a question, and I put it up on the board, and I asked students to answer the question, "What is the meaning of life?" And the answers were all just awful. The meaning of life is so I can be happy and play Fortnite. And then I usually, we have a discussion, and I say, "Okay, all right," and I hear all their answers, and I say, "Thank you very much, those are all wrong." I can do that. And this is what I say. The meaning of life is discovered not inside yourself. The meaning of life is discovered in your relationships with others. In other words, the meaning of life is found outside yourself. Now, I can't go full Christian in the classroom, unfortunately, and say that the meaning of life, the purpose for your existence, is your relationship with God. But at least I can do some yeoman's work in flipping that paradigm around, because they're always looking inward. I always tell the students, do you know what happens if you seek to find the meaning of life inside yourself? Philosophers call these people solipsists. You know what happens to solipsists? They kill themselves eventually. Don't do it. The meaning of life is discovered outside yourself. Now, we read literature to learn about relationships. We can see good relationships in good literature, and we can see bad relationships in good literature. We can see people's motives laid open for us, and we can learn so that we can have good relationships. So in other words, the reason why we are studying literature is so that we can fulfill the meaning of life properly. And then I say, open your books to Shakespeare, and then we get started. So Jesus started at the end, and he communicated his destination to his disciples. Why? To establish their commitment and an emotional connection.